Thanks very much, Stavros. Great pleasure to be here, having endured British Airways' latest contribution to tourism. We were part of a full flight yesterday that left London for Athens. Everyone on the plane, unfortunately, there was no luggage at all on the plane. But thanks to Victor, wherever Victor is, he lent me this shirt. So what I'd like to do really is tell you a little story about Manchester, but to do so in a particularly distinctive way. First of all, by just examining some of the global trends all of us have to live within, which I think are very important influences on growth. Talk a little bit about what I think that means for culture, and in that context, what Manchester is trying to do about that, and more particularly how Manchester is to respond. First of all, a general sort of comments around global trends. As Stavros says, I am the Chief Executive of Manchester. I've worked in Manchester for many years. I've been Chief Executive for 16 years, which is a long time. And I've been a passionate advocate of cities being engines of national growth. And if you look at the top 600 cities in the world at the present time, Manchester is one of them, so is the wonderful Athens. But over the next 10 years, at least 200 of those top 600 are going to change, at least 200. And all the indicators are at least 100 new cities will emerge from China alone. That gives, I think, a really strong indication of how globalization is impacting upon growth, impacting upon patterns of growth. And for Europe, what that will mean is that we will reduce our economic power, certainly in comparison with North America and the Far East. And that brings into very sharp focus, I think, what cities have to do in order to be able to respond to those challenges. So it will be as more important than ever that cities actually place trade, investment, and business growth at the heart of those strategies. And it's vital for Europe as a whole that European cities respond to that sort of challenge. What does that mean for culture? I think it means a lot for culture. Place matters more today than it ever has done. If you go and talk to a business person or an investor, he or she will place as much emphasis around the quality of the place as they do around the access to amenities. So culture, in a very fundamental way, is absolutely central to the development of a growth strategy for any city. And more particularly, what that means is that culture is now a lot wider than perhaps the definition of what it was 10 or indeed 15 years ago. When we talked about culture in Manchester 15 years ago, it was about the arts. More recently, it started to expand into sport. But technology is fundamentally changing what the definition of culture is today. It's about content. It's about skills. It's about ecosystems. It's about education. And people or cities that get all of that right really connect the culture to the skills, to the education, are actually driving growth because of the advancement in technology. I think that's a very important challenge. And we're seeing in all sorts of different cities and towns, certainly throughout the UK, I think it's almost the same here as well, is that as places have had to endure impacts associated with economic cycles, and Manchester has had more than its fair share of those problems, I can assure you, over the last 50 years or so. Not that I was there for all of that time, but certainly impacts which have been very, very negative. What we've seen is almost jewels emerge around how people, because they can access technology, have started to create new vibrant businesses. And what we have to do is increasingly address how we encourage those new technological businesses to grow, how we connect them with the wider cultural and creative sectors. For Manchester, as I've already indicated, the transition from what we were, which was a overly dominant, one-dimensional manufacturing and production centre, into a city which now has a deep and diversified business base, has been a very long struggle. It never happened overnight. The inheritance from my predecessors of Manchester was not the strongest we've ever had. We struggled to adapt to the globalization that took place in the 70s and 80s, 1970s and 80s. And what we did, as we were faced with all these challenges which left a legacy of industrial dereliction, is start to address what our key assets were. Our key assets around the university. How can the university, which was world class, how could that create a focus for science and innovation? How could we take advantage of our airport and the international connections our airport gave us? How could we remodel our commercial offer so that it became more attractive to commercial and professional firms? How could we drive our creative sector? How could we create the ecosystem which is so necessary for people to be able to access technology, to experience art and culture, and create the platform for growth? Manchester is now the fastest growing city outside London. The level of growth we've enjoyed over the last decade is unprecedented. We are a city now which is strongly and distinctively recognised as a place for creativity and commercial and professional services and sciences innovation, as we were regarded in the 50s and 60s around manufacturing. And we are now on very much an upward trend. Part of what we try to deliver around our creative sector, I think, has been very, very important. We've invested very heavily in facilities. We've invested too in preserving and protecting our heritage and our character. We've also moved on from being just a city in sport that's known for football. We have we have one team in Manchester. It's called Manchester City, because they're the only team who actually reside in Manchester. The other side, Manchester United, some of you may have heard that before, they are a global brand. Between them, they are creating a platform of awareness about Manchester, which is unprecedented. We asked a group of our economists to undertake an analysis about the impact of football on Manchester's economy. And what it came up with was quite startling because of the European and international penetration which those brands create, because of the attendances in European games and championships. The economic impact of those two clubs on Manchester is the equivalent of us hosting an Olympic Games every 4 years, which I think gives you an indication of the strength of those brands and how important it is. But equally, for us, it's very important that we strengthen and widen and deepen our cultural base and our cultural recognitions. And that's why, for me, one of the key lessons we've learned from other places, that it's not just about facilities, which is important, it's also about content, which is important. There are many, many examples of wonderful facilities all over the world. New York is one obvious example, but where the content of what's provided in those facilities doesn't quite match up to the quality of the facilities themselves. And that's one of the reasons why, on the back of our Commonwealth Games in 2002, we started to think about, well, if we wanted to be associated with quality, want to be doing things which is a characterization of our mantra, which is being original and modern in all that we do, we wanted to promote a festival, but we wanted to promote a festival of real difference and of real distinction. And that's where the Manchester International Festival, you've got a little booklet, or I've been told to wave this booklet in the air, but you have a little booklet which starts to explain some of the achievements of the Manchester International Festival, which is a biennial festival. But we invested in that festival not only by creating the right leadership under Christine and of course the renowned Alex Poots, who's our artistic director, a festival which would be focused exclusively on new commissions, whether it's plays, whether it's architecture, whether or not it's any type of culture. The festival itself focused exclusively on new commissions. And some of the examples of those commissions have been Macbeth, Sir Kenneth Branagh, which was the cornerstone of our festival last year. It just finished, I think, 3 weeks in the New York Armory because it was a joint commission between Manchester and New York. Sold out in Manchester in 1 hour. The Icelandic singer Bork opened our 2011 festival. The architects Zahir Eddad designed a structure for the 2011 festival, which looked like a musical note. Over 50% of our MIF program last year will go on tour around the world. And we have focused ourselves on unusual locations as well. What does all that mean? Well, what it means is that Manchester is being recognised as a place where original, modern type commissions are actually taking place. We are seeing increasing levels of association around the world in terms of what we are creating. And what that platform is being delivered is also creating for us is the opportunity for wider collaborations with cities. The owners of Manchester City Football Club own football clubs in New York, they own football clubs in Melbourne and Japan. What culture is providing us is the opportunity to establish new forms of international collaboration through our festival with New York, with Melbourne, and places like that. And we believe that will provide the opportunity for further collaborations going forward. We're seeing unprecedented levels of third-party funding, private and business sector funding included, in support of our festival. Why? Because the product is original, the product is different, and the product is seen to be creating quality that cannot be accessed any other way. And we're also creating a fresh perspective in the way in which the artistic direction of the city is taking shape. And that is creating all sorts of new opportunities about how our individual arts and cultural houses collaborate with each other, how we actually try to conform to an artistic framework which is driven around particular qualities, and how each of those individual organisations need to respond to that overall framework, and how it's giving us new models for provision involving places which can be brought forward now, new facilities which don't necessarily need to have anchor tenants and which need instead to be the subject of much sharper and much smarter commissioning opportunities. And what we're seeing very, very clearly is not just immediate impacts in our economy as a result of successful festivals. What we are seeing is the growth and development of a scaled ecosystem in Manchester, focused around young people, focused around new skills, focused around new educational provision, which is driving employment, which is driving growth. And I believe that provides a blueprint for other cities in the future. So to conclude, just 3 or 4 key points which I hope you find helpful. 1, all cities are engines of growth. They are crucial to national prosperity. And it is more important than ever, particularly because of the economic problems we've all experienced over the last several years, that cities collaborate more effectively than they ever have before. Creating activity, which is much wider than the traditional definition of culture, is crucial to economic growth. Every city has the capacity to lead and drive the development of their own ecosystem. When we talk about investment, it's not just about investment in buildings, it's about investment in programs, it's investment in contact. Manchester has come a long way. We are ready to collaborate with all cities around the world, particularly in Europe, and through our Manchester International Festival, I hope we provide the platform for collaboration with many of you in this room in the future. Thank you very much indeed.
We would like to open the floor now to questions from the audience. Please raise your hands, identify yourselves, and ask questions, please.
Morning. Good morning. What inspired you all those years ago to become so passionate about Manchester at the very beginning? What was the tipping point? Yeah.
Well, I was born there, so that helps, I think, be inspired by the place. I think anyone who spends any time in Manchester can't help but get inspired. There has always been a buzz about the place. There's always been a very strong civic pride. I was talking to Victor earlier. His brother came to stay in Manchester a few years ago, said he had the time of his life. It's a youthful place. We have some of the biggest universities in Europe, 100,000 a year students pass through our city. We therefore have what I would describe as a diversified entertainment model, something for everybody. And I think people, you know, we are cohesive. We heard, don't we, the importance of multiculturalism. Well, my parents came to Manchester, their grandparents came 100 years ago, and the way everyone has been able to integrate within our city, I think has been one of our more remarkable achievements, and we celebrate that in our cultural programs and festivals.
Gentleman in the back, right there.
Hi, thank you. Lionel Foster with the Urban Institute. I think there's often an assumption that arts and technology-driven growth can strengthen certain class fissures that maybe people with skills and means might benefit a bit more. Could you just talk a bit about what those conversations have been like, maybe who benefits from Manchester's growth and why?
Yeah, I think that's a very, very good point. All our young people today, whether or not they are doing well in school or not, have access to technology. They can use technology certainly a lot better than I can. In fact, when my technology breaks down, my youngest daughter is absolutely the right person to actually repair it. And what I think economic strategies around the world don't really fully comprehend is how that energy, how that whole approach can actually be, in a sense, driven and actually embraced, so that the education offer for our young people is relevant to what their own particular skills are, how technology needs to become an increasingly part of our education offer, how in further education terms technology needs to be aligned with content and culture and creative activities in a way it's not at the moment. And what we're doing now is responding to the needs of young people, the needs of businesses, by creating a framework where their own potential can be progressed, by actually challenging our education and skill providers to ensure that they bring forward those programs which are of relevance to young people today. And if you can do that, then what you have is a model which enables everyone in the city, everyone in society to play a very full and active part in the economic activities of a place. And that's certainly something which we're seeing increasing evidence of in Manchester, but we've still got a long way to go in order to deliver our overall objectives.
Nicole, right back there.
Hi, good morning. Thank you. I'm Nicole Golden with the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Almost a bit of a follow-up on the last question. Can or how can cultural richness or cultural opportunity be measured and compared?
Well, there's two different extremes, isn't there? One is the happiness factor, which we're seeing a lot more of, Richard, Florida's indexation and all of that, which I think gives some pointers. But fundamentally, we are seeing very, very clear evidence around economic impact. So one of the things Christine and her colleagues do at the festival each time is, well, what's been the impacts of our festival? So they will scour the world for examples of critical acclaim. That's one way of measuring our festival. And then we will develop our own econometric model, which will evaluate what the impact has been, how many more people came to the city, what was the impact on our tourist facilities, what was the impact in our hotels, what was the impact in levels of spending within the city in our restaurants, ticket sales, where did the people originate from. We can develop our own econometric model and demonstrate that the council invested, I don't know, what was it, 3 million and going up, but never mind, £3 million in our festival, but the economic impact for the council for Manchester was just less than £40 million last year over a 3-week period. And of course, in other aspects of our cultural programme, we measure impact by the good old fashion of how many jobs have been created, how many direct jobs, how many indirect jobs, how much money are we leveraging, what is the investment capacity that these jobs are creating, and this additional fund. So we have very, very clear ways of assessing the value for money of our interventions.
Vasily.
Good morning. Thank you for your kind presentation. Vasily Tsamis from the Stavros Niarchos Foundation. It appears that the Manchester International Festival did a superb job with Macbeth, The Machine, and others with Park Avenue Armory. Do you feel that we can triangulate this with Athens? And do you think we can leverage other know-how models and macroeconomic metric models that you provide?
One of the key themes of speech, and we've already started talking to Stavros and others, you know, we've got to collaborate. Athens has got to collaborate with other cities. Manchester would like to be a city which collaborates with Athens. We can learn so much from each other. I know your whole overall approach to philanthropy is probably a lot more advanced than ours in the UK. We can learn, therefore, a lot from yourselves. But in the context of not looking at just at culture, but looking at the creative sector generally, how we work together is something which I personally would be very, very keen to work with you and others to ensure that we have a very strong collaborative model. Just make one point, really, just to give you one example of how collaboration through culture can and sport can actually lead to other things. When the owners of Manchester City took over 5 years ago, we established a partnership. They invested very heavily in the football club. They've invested also very heavily in the community. Last Monday, they announced a 1 billion, which is 1.4 billion euro investment in housing in the eastern part of Manchester. And again, it shows a very, very clear pathway that how sport and culture can open up major new opportunities for investment and for community regeneration.
Yes, please. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Chris Baracus. I'm from ACS Athens, but I'm going to speak as a parent. Having visited twice this year Manchester because my son is studying there, I feel the optimistic side of recharging youth because I saw 90% of the people working in Manchester are young people. And that for us in Greece is something that we don't see very often. And we would like your help to tell us, how do you employ so many young students to be successful in what they do? Because I see lots of smiles there.
It's very kind and thankfully a confirmation of our story, really. I think it's what we've said. If you look at cities over the last 20 years, you will see real examples of commercial professional service development. Well, not everyone wants to be a lawyer. Not everybody wants to be, thankfully, an accountant. I absolutely get that. But what you have to do, therefore, is focus in those new emerging sectors which I believe are the key to long-term sustainability, the key to long-term growth, the key to long-term trading with different parts of the world. And that's where we've invested technology, life science. Manchester is now renowned as the centre for graphene, with the 2 Nobel Prize winners. So all of those new sectors are absolutely fundamental, and more of our young people who live in Manchester as well as people who come to study to Manchester are opting to stay in Manchester after their studies because they find it a place where they can secure not just gainful employment, but more particularly a place where they can enjoy themselves. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.